Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scottish Clans Podcast. This is Clint. Thank you for joining me today. I am excited to share with you 10 castles that are still owned by the original clan that built them. Each one's got its own story and its own features and its own origin, and there's just, this is why this whole topic is cool, is because it's cool stories. And I can't wait to share with you about these castles. Before I do that, I've got a couple of other things I want to share with you. One is the opportunity to have one of the best storytellers to accompany you on your next trip to Scotland. Yes, I'm talking about Bruce Fumey of the Scotland History Tours. You may have seen some of his videos on YouTube. If you haven't, you need to go check him out. But if you want to have somebody who is super knowledgeable about Scottish history and how that history ties in with the landscape, you could not have a better person to be along with you on your next trip to Scotland. So make sure you go down and get that email address out of the notes below. And as you send that email, say, "Hi, I'm interested," tell what dates you're thinking of, and we can get you all that information that you need so that you can make sure that that plan includes Bruce Fumey as a tour guide. All right, now let's get into today's show about that. There's 10 castles I want to share with you that are still owned by the original clan. And when I say still, I do not mean that it's been one continuous ownership. Each castle has its own tumultuous history. It's back when the clan occupied it, but then some of them passed out of the hands of the clan. Some of them never left and are still occupied by the descendants of the chiefs of that clan. So let's get into number one. Is going to be Kissimul Castle. I'll give you a couple of seconds to guess which clan that is. Kissimul Castle is the seat of the chiefs of the MacLeods of Barra. Yep, Kissimul Castle. Now, for those of you who don't know, the MacLeods of Barra is the very southern end of the island chain that makes up the Outer Hebrides. Off the west coast of Scotland, you have the Inner Hebrides that are closer to the mainland, and then farther west than that, you have the Outer Hebrides. Farther west than that, you have North America. So the MacLeods of Barra are one of the more remote clans, and Kissimul Castle was the seat of their chiefs. It was built in the 1400s. It was the base of operations for these chiefs who had a reputation as pirates, the most notable of which was Ruari the Turbulent. And it was from here that the chief of the MacLeods would sail to take his place on the Council of the Isles, the primary advisory group to the Lord of the Isles. Yeah, and that's something I've done another episode on. We talked about which clans are a part of the Lord of the Isles, and I actually have a free PDF that shows you the geographic distribution of the clan chiefs that were part of this Council of the Isles and where those clans were distributed geographically. So I've got that in a PDF. If you want to go to scottishclans.info, you can get that there. But back to the MacLeods of Barra. So their chiefs were a part of this council, and that's where they would leave from to go to that council, was from their castle of Kissimul. The castle was abandoned after a fire in 1795, and Barra was sold in 1838. But in 1937, Robert Lister MacNeill, who was the chief of the MacNeills at that time, bought the castle back and began restorations. And today, the chiefs of the MacNeills lease the castle to Historic Scotland. The lease is good for 1,000 years. That was where the Kissimul Castle, chiefs of the MacNeills of Barra, it passed out of their hands, but it's back in thanks to Robert Lister MacNeill. And now they have a relationship with Historic Scotland, but technically it's still owned by the MacNeills of Barra. The next castle is Duart Castle. Yes, Duart Castle. I actually had the opportunity to see this one when I was in Scotland a couple months ago. It was very impressive. You come around, we were on a boat coming up from the south, and the terrain kind of peels away as you're moving north, and Duart Castle comes into view. Very imposing, very impressive, in a very commanding position. This is one of several castles built in the 13th century by the early chiefs of the MacDougals. The MacLeans are first on record as positioned at Duart Castle in 1367, after MacDougall power in Argyll had been greatly diminished, thanks for them siding with the Cummins against Robert the Bruce when he succeeded to the throne, he remembered the people who ambushed him and almost wiped out his whole party, and the Dougals paid for it. But they didn't completely go away, but the MacLeans got their castle that they'd built at Duart. The castle was taken in 1647, so fast-forwarding a few hundred years. It was taken by General Leslie during the Scottish Civil War, while Lachlan, the 16th chief, was fighting with Montrose. The next chief, Allen, recovered Duart Castle for a short time, but was forced to sell it to the Earl of Argyll in order to pay off deep debt. When Argyll fell out of favor with King Charles II, it looked like Allen might manage to regain the castle, but Argyll was able to recover and kept the castle. But in 1910, Sir Fitzroy MacLean, the 26th chief, purchased the castle and began repairs on it, and is still in MacLean hands to this day. Castle number 3 is Dunvegan Castle. This is a cool castle, and there's like this little subgroup of castles within the 10 that I'm going to share with you that never passed out of the hands of the original builders and are still occupied to this day by the chiefs of that clan. And so this is one of those. Dunvegan Castle, built in the 1200s, similar in style to Kissimmel and Cashel Mill, which is the seat of the McKinnon chiefs. The MacLeods are split into two distinct lineages. Shiel Torquil, or the MacLeods of Lewis, and Shiel Tormod, the MacLeods of MacLeod, or sometimes styled as of Harrison Dunvegan. Dunvegan was the seat of the latter, while those of Lewis were based out of Stornoway. Significantly, Shiel Torquil disintegrated in the late 1500s, and their lands were acquired by the Mackenzies, while Shiel Tormod persisted in possession of their primary castle of Dunvegan. It's the only castle in Scotland to be home to a fairy flag. And I'm actually going to include a link because I did a whole episode on that. It's been a while ago, but I'm going to include the link so you can just fast forward straight to that, and you can listen to, if you want more information on the fairy flag of the MacLeods of MacLeod, which is housed in Dunvegan Castle. Makes it very unique. That's the only castle that has one of those. The next castle, number 4, is Blair Castle. And now this is kind of an interesting origin story. It began to be built by John Cummin, the Lord of Badenoch, while the landowner, David Strathbogie, Earl of Athol, was away on crusade with Louis IX of France. When David Strathbogie, the Earl of Athol, returned to his home to see his neighbor so happily building a stronghold on his land, he complained to King Alexander III and regained possession of this land with a head start on a new castle. So thank you, John Cummin, for getting a start on the castle for him. The castle, the earldom, and the lands were forfeited by David's son, David II, for opposing Robert Bruce's claim to the throne. So similar story as with the MacDougals, except for the Strathbogie line does not continue on as the MacDougals did in a much diminished state. Blair Castle changed hands in the succeeding generations, but a younger son of Murray of Tullibardine was made Earl of Athol in 1629. The Murrays were royalists in the conflicts of the 1600s, and Oliver Cromwell captured the castle in 1650. The lands and title, including Blair Castle, were returned to the Murrays when Charles II was restored to the throne. Coming out of the other side of the Jacobite risings, the Murrays were still in possession of Blair Castle, as they are to this day, although the 10th Duke put it in a charitable trust because the 11th Duke indicated no desire to leave South Africa. Right, but they're still in possession of it. Number 5, we're going to move to Fullis Castle. This is kind of interesting. This is Monroe Castle, and I've done a whole episode, and I can include the link for that down in the notes below as well. But the Monroes have a very early origin date claimed for them, as well as a very early origin date for this castle. The Monroes were seated in their territory of Ferndonal since the 1000s. Now, if you have been following this podcast for a long time, you know that an origin in the 1000s is not absurdly early, like it can't happen, but it's really early for most of the Scottish clans that we'd recognize today. Now, it's interesting, if you just go over to Ireland, it's much more common that clans who still carry the same name today, where we still see people with this surname, they can trace, in many cases, their lineages back as that clan to the 1000s or earlier, even in some cases. However, for Scottish clans where records weren't as well kept, that is super early. There's been a castle in this Ferndonal territory of the Munros since 1134. This would make Folis Castle one of the older castles of Scotland. Problem, there's no evidence of the clan in this area before the 1300s, but does that mean they weren't there? No. It just means that we don't have evidence of it. So for me, that's not a showstopper. I mean, if you're not writing stuff down, how else do you pass it down? Through the lore and the legends, through your Shanachis, those who possessed and were responsible for passing down this information, the heritage of the clan, and it'd be word of mouth. Doesn't mean it's completely false. So I'm not discounting it, but I just thought I'd share that with you. Folis provided the setting for the alliance between the Munros and the Mackays of Strathnaver. This is a cool story. Donald Mackay was imprisoned here in 1542 after being taken captive at the Battle of Alton-Beath. He was treated so well by his Munro captors that a friendship developed between the two clans. Folis Castle is the subject of Clan Munro's slogan, Castell Folis na Haine, meaning Castle Folis ablaze. This is in reference to the signal beacon, which was lit from the castle tower as a signal for the host of Clan Munro to gather for a fight. The current castle is what was restored after the original was burned by a force of Jacobites, the Munros being on the government/Hanoverian side. Okay, and just as a reminder, I'll include the link for the Munro episode that I did in case you want to go back and learn more about the Munros. So number 6 on the list, Wemyss Castle, built in 1421 by John Wemyss. Now I just might want to make a note right here. Wemyss is spelled Wemyss, so it looks like Wemyss, but it's Wemyss. And the Wemyss are a really interesting lineage. Likely on account of this castle's proximity to royal centers of power, there were several interactions with the royal family, such as when Mary Queen of Scots met her future husband, Lord Darnley, in Wemyss Castle on the 17th of February, 1565. That's pretty cool that we know that so many hundreds of years ago, because I know what day I proposed to my wife. I know what day actually our 20th wedding anniversary is coming up. This woman, she's just awesome. She's so good. Coming up on our 20th anniversary, and I know what date that is, but I don't know what day I actually met her. I do know where I was, but I don't know which day it was when I actually struck up a conversation with her. But Mary Queen of Scots, we have the exact date here, and it took place in Wemyss Castle in 1565. Another royal connection is in April 1591. This is quoted right off of Wikipedia. In April 1591, King James had Lilias, or Sophia Ruthven, a daughter of William Ruthven, 1st Earl of Gowrie, shut away in Wemyss Castle to prevent her marrying Ludovic Stuart, the 2nd Duke of Lennox. Lennox managed to get his bride out of the castle and marry her at Dunkeld, and after 10 days, the king allowed the couple to come to court. Unquote. So that's a cool story too. Not really a clan story, so I haven't told it here, but maybe worth looking into there. This Wemyss Castle is cool because it has a ghost. It's not the only one on our list that has a ghost, by the way. But this ghost is referred to as Green Jean. She's described as tall, thin, wears a green dress that swishes when she goes by. And if you know who she was, let me know. I couldn't find who this ghost is supposed to be the ghost of. I read it in a couple of different sources, but none of them said who she's supposed to be the ghost of. So if you know, reach out to me at thescottishclans@gmail.com. I'll mention your name and who you found out that's Green Genie is actually supposed to be. And Weems Castle, because it's on this list, is still in the Weems family. I just want to make kind of like a postscript here to this. The Weems are a branch of the ancient Macduff clan of Fife, who are Duff. So who are they named after? Who's the Duff? It was probably Duv, who was a MacAlpin dynasty king of Alaba. So that's really cool. I read a little bit more about this whole thing in a writing by John Bannerman in Kinship Court and what's the name of that book? Anyway, you've heard me reference, if you're a repeat listener here, you've heard me mention this book before. John Bannerman, though, wrote a paper on the Macduff Earls of Fife, and he talks about their descent from this. There's more I could go into detail on, but I actually got way into detail on that in a podcast episode. It's called Mac versus O. Why do you see the Mac and not as much the O in Scottish surnames? And because in that same article he goes into more detail on that. But anyway, Weems are interesting lineage there, descending from the ancient Macduff Earls of Fife, and the premise for the law of Clan Macduff, which is mentioned in 1300s government official documents. All right, number 7, Castle Forbes. The estate was granted to Alexander Forbes as a reward for his part at the Battle of Harlaw. He thus became the first Lord Forbes. The name of the original castle was Putaki. And once again, if you know the meaning of this name, and you know what, this is probably going to end up being a YouTube video, so if you know it, put it down in the comments. Also, with that, if you know who Green Gene is, put it down in the comments. If down the road you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and help me out there, because I couldn't find what Putaki actually means. But that was the original castle that was on this Forbes estate. Drumanor Castle was the original seat of the Forbes chiefs, so Putaki wasn't. It suffered at the hands of the Jacobites throughout their various risings and was sold out of the family in the late 1700s. But the Forbes Castle is the current home of the chief of the Forbes clan. So not only is it on this estate that was acquired by the first Lord Forbes, but and so Battle of Harlaw, that earlier I said that Alexander Forbes, it was a reward for his part of the Battle of Harlaw. I should have also included there, for those of you who don't know when that was, so like how far back does this land go with the Forbes? The Battle of Harlaw was in 1411, okay? So that gives you the approximate time period that we're dealing with here. And that estate has been in the Forbes family since the early 1400s. And the castle that is currently Forbes Castle is now the current home of the chief of the Forbes clan. So that's pretty cool. Number 8. This is another one of those that I told you was in a special category, along with Castle Forbes and Dunvegan Castle, is that this is Inverary, which I'll get to this in a second, but it's in that same category. Built around 1450 by Duncan Campbell of Loch Awe. Now, if you remember, I've just recently had a podcast on and actually did some YouTube footage in Scotland on site of Dunstaffnage Castle. Now, you're thinking, what does that have to do with Duncan Campbell? Well, aside from the fact that the Campbells eventually acquired possession of Dunstaffnage Castle, Duncan Campbell of Loch Awe was the father of the first Earl of Argyll. So up in there, they were lords, and they possessed this area, and they were styled of Loch Awe, but they weren't earls yet until Colin Campbell, the son of this Duncan Campbell, he becomes the first Earl of Argyll, and he was an in-law to John Stewart of Innermeath, who was the Lord of Lorne. And there's this whole wild story, like when we were on site there, we were saying that this story could be turned into a very successful miniseries. It has all of the elements that people want to see in that, but that is the genesis story of the Stuarts of Appin. And the Campbells were very involved in that story. The first Earl of Argyll was very involved in the story. And so this Duncan Campbell that built Inverary Castle in 1450 is his dad, just to kind of try to tie it in all together. The Campbells shifted their power base to Inverary in the 1600s, so this didn't become the seat of the chiefs until that late. When the current Duke of Argyll is in town, he and his family stay on the second floor. The castle has an impressive collection of arms and armor, and there are paths to hike on the estate as well. And this is another one of those castles that has a ghost story associated with it. Now, there might be others that I've already mentioned that I didn't include the ghost. So if I missed one of these castles that I've already talked about and I didn't say that it has a ghost, once again, reach out. Once again, if you're watching the video version of this, put it in the comments. But this ghost that's associated with Inverary is the ghost of an Irish harper that plays before the death of a member of the chiefly family. And I might save that episode. That might become a future podcast episode where we go into more depth on who that Irish harper was, how he died, and what he's doing, what is his connection with Inverary. I will also note that me and my family on that trip to Scotland, we did go see Inverary Castle in person on the estate. However, we only caught like the last 15 minutes that it was open. And so we really didn't, and we were too late for the last tour to go through. It was just, we didn't get there in time. So I really wish we could have done more there. Adam Campbell, my friend here out in Utah, he has had an opportunity to, he's actually very involved in the Clan Campbell Society, and he just actually, I can't remember the exact position, but I think he was actually just made the board. I can't remember if it was the Clan Campbell Society of North America or if it was a different thing. Adam, reach out to me, correct me, and I'll fix it. But he was telling me all about all the things you can do on the Inverary estate, and we just didn't get there in time. So, but Adam, little shout out to you and to all the Campbell friends I have, including those back in Grace, Idaho, if you ever listen to this. I wish we would have had more time there in Inverary. Airlie Castle. So I don't know if you can tell this so far, but I'm really trying to get all over Scotland. We've been out in the Hebrides on a couple of them, Dunvegan, Kissimmel, Duart. We've been in the Western Highlands. Now we've also been in the Eastern Scotland with Castle Forbes. Now we're in kind of like the Angus area part of Scotland. And this Airlie Castle was acquired by the Ogilvies from a grant by James I to Walter Ogilvie of Lintrathen, who was the Lord High Treasurer of Scotland in 1432. The Ogilvies had other castles, but this was the seat of the chief. Archibald Campbell, the 8th Earl of Argyll, destroyed the castle in 1640 during the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, as the Ogilvies supported Charles I and the Campbells, at least the Campbell chiefs, the Earls of Argyll, supported the Oliver Cromwell parliamentarian faction there. The Ogilvies lost the castle on account of their support of the Jacobites, and in 1778, David Ogilvie received a pardon and returned from the continent. He had a mansion built using parts of the previous castle that were still standing. All right, so it integrated. There's some continuity and structure between the original castle and the mansion that was built by David Ogilvie. The Earl of Airlie still lives there. That's pretty cool. So once again, Airlie is in this category where it's still lived in by the leader of the kindred that originally possessed that estate or that castle. This one did pass out of Ogilvie hands just briefly and then came back in. And a ram, the doom of Airlie Castle, is said to circle the castle when one of the family is near death or bad fortune is about to strike. So this is a really interesting legend that I'd like to dive into more. We've heard about, you may have heard about banshees, and there's different words for those. Banliche, or there's in Scotland they have some other terms as well as banshee, which is common in Ireland. And a lot of the times the legends goes that you'll hear the wailing of this banshee before, the banshee that's assigned to that clan before somebody in that clan dies. In this case, it's an animal, so that's really interesting. It's a ghost. It's an animal ghost. Interesting. All right, our number 10, rounding out our list, You know where we haven't been? You know what region of Scotland we haven't been in? We haven't been down on the borders. And so we're going to, for our last castle in this list, we're going to go down to Gilnockie Tower, which is the seat of, you guessed it, the notorious Armstrongs. Now, it wasn't their chief's seat. Gilnockie Tower was built by Johnny Armstrong, who was the brother of Thomas Armstrong of Mangerton, who was the chief of the Armstrongs in 1520. Johnny, this brother of the chief, was a notorious border reiver. So, once again, Gilnockie is not the main seat of the chief. The Mangerton Tower is. Mangerton didn't make the list because it's now a barely recognizable pile of rocks and is not currently owned by the Armstrongs. Because I even would have considered it in its reduced condition if it was still in the hands of the Armstrongs, but it's not. Gilnockie Tower is. Now, Gilnockie fell out of the Armstrong possession, but was purchased in 1978 by TCR Armstrong Wilson, who began restoration efforts. Today, Gilnockie looks every bit the stout border tower house. It's been very well restored. It looks impressive. Gilnockie is the current home of the Clan Armstrong Center and includes a grand hall and master bedroom, as well as a Clan Armstrong museum. So there you have it, rounding out that list of 10. Okay, so here's what I want to know. Did you like this type of an episode? Do you like, because I just handled a very small fraction of castles that I could have even looked up, let alone that could have made the list. Do I need to do another one of these episodes and add some more on there? Is this the kind of stuff you like? Let me know if you like this, and I will do another list of 10 castles that are still possessed by the original kindred or clan, all right? And also, don't forget that if you want to plan out your next trip to Scotland and include the great storyteller Bruce Fumey, click the email link below and say, hey, I'm interested in getting some more information on my next trip to Scotland. I'm making sure that Bruce Fumey is there to tell me about the history. Guys, I have personally had the opportunity to be taught in person at Stirling Castle by Bruce Fumey. He's amazing. I had my whole family there. He was super good with the kids. He's awesome. He's such a good person. Like, he was very kind. While we were at Stirling Castle, several people came up and recognized him from his successful YouTube channel and wanted his attention. And he had showed up there to meet me and my family. And while he was very kind to these people coming up, he made us the priority. I was super impressed by that. And I cannot more genuinely refer you to include him in your next trip. So make sure you get that email link below, send a message out saying, hey, we're planning on a trip to Scotland and we want to know what our options are about how to go about this. And they'll hook you up with all the information you need. If you want to reach out to me personally, you can do so at thescottishclans.com. And don't forget to go over and see more resources at scottishclans.info. That's all I got for today. Marchen leven Rasta.